But going back to passports being found at Ground Zero, regardless if Atta's novelty Conch Republic passport isn't part of the official story, therefore isn't available to compare conditions with Satam al-Sakambi's passport being found, because with those unusual circumstances and holes in the stories of their whereabouts, for all we know, it's possible both passports may have well been planted at Ground Zero. And it is a valid claim when such items as paper passports can be found at Ground Zero, but not any of the 4 black boxes from Flights 11 and 175. This is Ground Zero worker Mike Malone, who was recognized for his heroic efforts in the recovery and cleanup. He appeared on the 9/11 episode for Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura in 2009, and confessed that he saw one of the black boxes get recovered within the first 3 weeks of Ground Zero cleanup, and that later, it was confirmed to him by other fellow co-workers that 2 more boxes were found, making it a total of 3 being found by Malone and associates. Quite a revelation, because you then have to wonder why the FBI would cover up or withhold such physical evidence. But throughout the episode, Jesse Ventura eventually starts to puzzle things as to why the feds have hidden the black boxes, and his best lead ironically comes from Mike Malone himself, because he happens to also know a former air traffic controller from Logan Airport and others who work with American Airlines. Throughout the course of the episode, Malone's acquaintances from Boston Logan and the airlines were reluctant to do an interview for Jesse and refused to be on camera. But towards the end of the episode, Malone reveals to Jesse and Braverman what his acquaintances working at Logan and American Airlines knew about Flight 11 on September 11th.
Mike Malone told us a real mind blower. He said the airline people said the hijackers were in the cockpit of American Airlines while it was still on the runway, before it even took off.
What? Malone says that somebody on the ground knew hijacker was in the cockpit, and somebody else on the ground let that plane take off.
Which, if we're going to stick to the official story, that would mean that pilot hijacker Atta was in the cockpit behind the controls before departure. Regardless of this suggests he wouldn't have simply boarded as a passenger, because the claim that the hijackers were in the cockpit during Flight 11's and even possibly Flight 175's departures can be backed up by the tracking of the flight's original path, which was already pointed out specifically on the day of 9/11, which neither of the 2 Logan flights were going the correct route right after takeoff, as this news piece that day even pointed out on the evening of 9/11 on local New York Fox Channel 5.
And what I did was I went down to my office and I picked up one of these flight charts that all pilots use. This is a high-altitude flight chart, and I looked up the route of flight that these planes out of Boston would be flying to Los Angeles, and it's actually further off course than we were originally speaking, because the route of flight should have taken both of those aircraft out of Boston up over southern New Hampshire, up over southern Vermont, then over Syracuse, New York, Buffalo, and then out over Michigan before turning a little more southwestward to go to Los Angeles. So, which leads speculation to a couple of things. One, you could say then that this hijacking occurred probably right after takeoff, because as we were also talking earlier, when the way these aircraft are programmed to fly, the flight crews put in that assigned flight plan prior to leaving the gate, and once they take off from their departure airport, they usually hit the computer button at about 1,000 feet, and then the autopilot really flies it the rest of the way.
So would the control tower know immediately that the plane was not on target?
Yes, because the first clearance would have been for these airplanes to fly to Manchester, New Hampshire. That's what's called their first fix, or the first navigational point that they should cross over. And Manchester, New Hampshire is the opposite direction to New York City. So from that standpoint, that leads me to believe that the hijacking occurred immediately after takeoff.
Not that this is actual evidence to prove Atta was not a pilot or hijacker on Flight 11, but it certainly counters the official claim that if he did pilot it, he did so not by gaining access as a regular traveler.
There is a theory being debated right now based on what Attorney General John Ashcroft said yesterday, that each one of these planes had anywhere from 3 to 6 people on board involved with a hijacking. There is a theory that it's possible that a number of these men didn't even know each other, and that they waited on board before they were given some sort of signal to commandeer the jet. Can you provide any more information on that this morning?
Yes, I can. I've spoken to law enforcement investigators, some of the investigators, and they say they are looking increasingly at the likelihood that the 2 pilots would have known each other. But then when they got aboard these planes, that then there was another group of about 3 individuals who they did not know, who came from other cells, they are calling them. And those individuals then, through some signal, either it was those individuals who gave a signal to the pilots through some overt action, at which point everyone knew that they should get up and start their jobs, that they had all been tasked to individual jobs.
And it certainly opens a lot of questions, which will be addressed real soon. According to the official story, Flight 11 gets hijacked 15 minutes after departure at 8:14 a.m. over central Massachusetts, turning first northwest, then south, and that Flight 175 was hijacked between 8:42 a.m. and 8:46 a.m., approximately making it either 22 to 26 minutes after its takeoff, which makes it a rather glaring anomaly according to what the normal flight route is departing out of Logan, exiting up over southern New Hampshire, and not turning out away from the normal air traffic all of a sudden, which, as Fox 5's newscaster Mike Gregory stated, this would be an indication both flights were hijacked immediately after departure, especially also with the second plane, Flight 175, which also had 3 near mid-air collisions, one around 8:51 a.m. When changing altitude, it nearly missed Delta Airlines Flight 2315 flying from Hartford to Tampa, and according to author Lynn Spencer in her book from 2008, Touching History, The Untold Story of the Drama That Unfolded in the Skies Over America on 9/11, moments before Flight 175 crashed, it avoided another near collision with Midwest Express Flight 7, which departed Milwaukee and was heading to LaGuardia Airport in New York. And another one that's lesser known was TWA Flight number 3, which took off from JFK Airport in New York, destined for St. Louis, in which ABC News was able to report it towards the evening of September 11th, having interviewed the pilot and some of the passengers.
You dodged one of the aircraft that hit the tower?
Well, he was up there whenever we were coming from New York, so what we had to do was, they were not talking to him, and he was changing his heading and his altitude, so they just cleared us to deviate however we had to stay away from him.
It was right after they had taken off, and the passengers were horrified.
I thought we were going to crash. I thought the plane was going to crash, because when we took off, the plane kind of went down and came back up, it was kind of shaking. And it wasn't your normal taking off routine. And then you could just see like a plane that just kind of just bypassed us really close. And I said maybe it was just a mere miss.
But according to the phone calls made from Flight 175, passengers Peter Hansen and Brian David Sweeney made phone calls from the GTE airphones in the rear of the aircraft. Airphone records also indicate that Garnett Bailey made 4 phone call attempts to his wife, but never connected. On the flight phone call chart from the Zacharias Moussaoui trial exhibit says that 2 unnamed flight attendants made 5 calls from row 31 on seats C, D, E, F, and G. However, when you click to each flight attendant, it only shows the same 3 calls for each one. The first only lasted 75 seconds, and the following one lasted 31 seconds. According to Wikipedia, it also says that flight attendant Robert Fangman made a call. Phone calls from the passengers would indicate that the hijackers pushed the passengers and flight crew to the back of the plane, having already stabbed and killed other passengers, and possibly the pilots, that they had knives, mace, and made a threat of having a bomb. In Peter Hansen's last call to his father, he stated that he thought the hijackers intended to go to Chicago or someplace and fly it into a building.